In 1941, experts said building a cargo ship took at least 230 days. By 1943, one man was pumping them out every 4 days. The Navy thought he was lying. The British thought he was insane. He wasn't either. His name was Henry Kaiser, and he had never built a ship in his entire life. He was a road builder, a dam constructor, a guy who poured concrete and moved dirt. But when America needed 10 million tons of shipping to win World War II, this civilian outsider walked into the shipbuilding industry and broke every single rule they had. The shipbuilders laughed at him, then they watched in stunned silence as he changed warfare forever. This is the story of how one man's impossible trick saved the war effort and rewrote the rules of manufacturing. Let's go back to 1940. Europe is burning. Hitler controls France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, Poland, and half of a dozen other countries. Britain stands alone, and they're getting strangled, not by bombs, not by bullets, by drowning ships. German U-boats are hunting in packs across the Atlantic Ocean, torpedoing everything that moves. Merchant ships carrying food, fuel, weapons, tanks, planes, everything Britain needs to survive, are getting sent to the bottom at a terrifying rate. In 1940 alone, the Germans sank over 4 million tons of Allied shipping. 4 million tons. That's roughly 1,000 large cargo ships gone in 1 year. Britain is an island. They can't grow enough food to feed their population. They can't produce enough steel, rubber, oil, or raw materials to run their factories. Everything has to come by ship across the Atlantic, and every week, more ships are getting sunk than Britain can replace. The math is brutal and simple. If this continues, Britain will run out of ships, run out of supplies, and lose the war without Germany ever having to invade. President Franklin Roosevelt understands this completely. America isn't officially in the war yet, but Roosevelt knows that if Britain falls, the United States will face Nazi Germany alone. He starts a program called Lend-Lease, basically giving Britain ships, weapons, and supplies on credit. But there's a massive problem. America doesn't have enough ships either. The US merchant fleet is old, outdated, and way too small. American shipyards are building cargo ships the same way they've been building them for decades. One ship at a time, carefully, slowly, using techniques that haven't changed since the early 1900s. Traditional riveting, custom parts, skilled craftsmen doing everything by hand. A single cargo ship takes between 230 and 250 days to build from start to finish. That's 8 months, almost a year. Roosevelt does the math. At the current rate, even if every American shipyard works at full capacity, they can't replace ships faster than the Germans are sinking them. And once America enters the war, which everyone knows is coming, the demand for shipping will explode. The military will need ships to transport troops, tanks, planes, ammunition, fuel. The Allies will need ships to feed Britain and support operations in North Africa, the Mediterranean, and eventually Europe. The numbers are staggering. Experts estimate that America needs to build at least 5,000 cargo ships. 5,000. At the current pace, that would take decades. The U.S. Maritime Commission, the government agency responsible for merchant shipping, is in panic mode. They need a miracle. They need someone who can build ships faster, cheaper, and in numbers that seem impossible. They put out calls to every major shipbuilding company in America. Most of the responses are variations of the same message. It can't be done. Shipbuilding is complicated. It requires skilled labor. It takes time. There are no shortcuts. Then someone suggests Henry Kaiser. The Maritime Commission looks at his resume: roads, dams, construction projects, no ships, nothing maritime at all. They're skeptical, but they're also desperate. They invite him to submit a proposal. What happens next sounds like fiction. Henry J. Kaiser is 58 years old in 1940. He's made a fortune building infrastructure across America: the Hoover Dam, the Grand Coulee Dam, highways in California, pipelines, bridges. He's known for two things. First, he finishes projects ahead of schedule and under budget. Second, He doesn't care about the way things have always been done. If traditional methods are slow, he invents new methods. If experts say something is impossible, he proves them wrong. When Kaiser looks at shipbuilding, he doesn't see an ancient craft that requires years of apprenticeship and specialized knowledge. He sees an assembly problem, and Kaiser knows assembly. He's been using mass production techniques in construction for years. He's studied Henry Ford's automobile factories. He understands that if you break a complex process into simple, repeatable steps, you can train workers fast and produce things at incredible speed. The shipbuilding industry thinks Kaiser is a clown. These are men whose families have been building ships for generations. They know every rivet, every plate, every measurement by heart. They take pride in their craftsmanship. And here comes this outsider who builds dams, telling them he can revolutionize their industry. They literally laugh at him in meetings. One shipyard executive publicly calls Kaiser's ideas the ravings of a landlubber who doesn't know bow from stern. But the Maritime Commission is desperate enough to give him a chance. In early 1941, they award Kaiser contracts to build cargo ships, not fancy ships, not fast ships, basic, standardized cargo vessels that can carry 10,000 tons of supplies across the Atlantic. They're called Liberty ships, and the design is actually based on an old British tramp steamer from the 1930s. Nothing innovative about the design itself. It's what Kaiser plans to do with the construction process that's revolutionary. Kaiser picks a location for his first shipyard, Richmond, California. It's perfect, right on San Francisco Bay with deep water access, close to steel mills, near major rail lines, empty land where he can build massive facilities from scratch. He doesn't buy an existing shipyard with old equipment and old ways of thinking. He starts completely fresh. Now here's where Kaiser's genius becomes clear. He doesn't try to build ships the traditional way, just faster. He reinvents the entire process from the ground up. Traditional shipbuilding works like this. You lay the keel, the backbone of the ship. Then you build the ship from the bottom up, one section at a time, right there in the shipway. Every piece is custom fitted. Riveters work for weeks joining metal plates together with thousands of rivets, each one individually heated and hammered into place. Electricians run wiring. Plumbers install pipes. Everything happens sequentially, one trade after another, all working in cramped spaces inside a partially built ship. Kaiser looks at this process and sees absurd inefficiency. Why build everything in sequence when you can build in parallel? Why custom fit everything when you can standardize? Why work in cramped ship sections when you can work in open factory spaces? He decides to build ships the way Ford builds cars. Assembly line, prefabrication, standardized parts. Here's his system. Instead of building the ship from bottom to top in the shipway, Kaiser breaks the ship into huge sections. The bow, the stern, sections of the hull, the superstructure. Each section is built separately in what are basically massive open-air factories. Workers can stand on the ground. They have room to move. They can use cranes and machinery. Each section is assembled from smaller sub-assemblies. A hull section might be built from 10 smaller prefabricated panels. Those panels are built from standardized steel plates. Everything is modular. While one team is working on the bow section, another team is simultaneously working on the stern. A third team is building a midship section. A fourth team is assembling the deck. All of this is happening at the same time, in parallel, not in sequence. Once all the major sections are complete, giant cranes lift them and join them together in the shipway like massive Lego blocks. What used to take months happens in days, but Kaiser doesn't stop there. He makes another radical change that horrifies traditional shipbuilders. He eliminates most of the riveting. Ships have been held together with rivets for centuries, millions of rivets per ship, each one requiring a skilled worker to heat it, place it, and hammer it. It's slow, labor-intensive, and requires years of training. Kaiser says, forget rivets, we're using welding. Welding technology exists, but it's rarely used in shipbuilding. The shipbuilding establishment doesn't trust it. They worry about weld integrity. They worry about metal fatigue. They argue that riveted joints are proven and reliable. Kaiser doesn't care. Welding is faster. Welding requires less skill. You can train someone to make a decent weld in weeks, while training a master riveter takes years. Welding creates stronger joints with less weight. The math is obvious to Kaiser. Of course, there's a workforce problem. Building 5,000 ships requires hundreds of thousands of workers. Skilled shipbuilders are rare. There aren't enough trained workers in the entire country to staff the number of shipyards Kaiser wants to open. Traditional shipyards would say this is impossible. You can't build ships without skilled workers. Kaiser says, watch me. He doesn't hire experienced shipbuilders. He can't. They don't exist in the numbers he needs. Instead, he hires whoever he can find. Farmers, shopkeepers, women who've never worked in heavy industry, retired men, teenagers, people who've never seen a ship up close. The shipbuilding establishment says this is suicide. You can't build ships with untrained workers. Kaiser proves them wrong. Remember, Kaiser has broken the construction process into simple, repeatable tasks. You don't need to understand how an entire ship works. You just need to learn your specific task. Weld this joint. Bolt these plates. Install this pipe. Each task is simple enough that workers can learn it in days or weeks. Kaiser sets up massive training programs. He brings in teachers, creates instructional films, builds full-scale mock-ups where workers can practice. Within a few weeks, someone who's never worked with metal is making acceptable welds. The traditional shipyards are still skeptical. Fine, they say. Maybe Kaiser can build ships with untrained workers, but the ships will be terrible. Poor quality. Unsafe. They'll fall apart at sea. The first Liberty ships will be death traps, just wait. The first Liberty ship, built by Kaiser's Richmond shipyard, the SS Patrick Henry, launches in September 1941. It takes 150 days to build. Not great by Kaiser's standards, but remember, his workforce is brand new. They're still learning. Traditional shipyards are building similar ships in 240 days. Kaiser has already beaten them with a workforce of beginners, but Kaiser isn't satisfied. 150 days is still too slow. He knows the process can be faster, much faster. He studies every step. Where are the bottlenecks? What's taking too long? How can we eliminate waste? He's constantly refining, constantly improving. He adds more prefabrication. He improves the training programs. He brings in more machinery. He reorganizes workflow. Every ship takes less time than the one before. By December 1941, when Japan attacks Pearl Harbor and America officially enters the war, Kaiser's Richmond shipyard is building Liberty ships in under 100 days. The traditional shipyards are still around 200 days. Kaiser has cut construction time in half, and he's just getting started. Roosevelt needs ships immediately. The war in the Pacific opens up a completely new theater, requiring massive amounts of shipping. The Battle of the Atlantic intensifies. U-boats are sinking ships faster than ever. Every week of delay means more ships sunk, more sailors drowned, more supplies lost. The pressure on Kaiser is immense. Build faster, build more. The entire war effort depends on it. Kaiser responds by going all in on his methods. He opens more shipyards. Richmond isn't enough. He builds a second massive facility in Portland, Oregon, then another in Vancouver, Washington. Each new yard learns from the previous ones. Each one is more efficient. He's not just building ships now, he's building shipyards that are themselves optimized for mass production. At the same time, Kaiser is solving problems traditional shipyards never bothered with because they never tried to build this fast. Steel shortages. He works directly with steel mills to secure priority access. Labor shortages. He recruits aggressively and improves working conditions to reduce turnover. Housing shortages near the shipyards. He builds entire communities with affordable housing for workers. Childcare. He sets up some of the first workplace childcare centers in America so mothers can work. Medical care. He creates prepaid health plans for workers that later become the model for Kaiser Permanente, still one of the largest healthcare organizations in America. Kaiser understands that building ships fast isn't just about the construction process. It's about the entire ecosystem supporting that process. Workers who are healthy, housed, and not worried about childcare are more productive. Workers who feel valued stay longer, reducing training costs. Everything is connected. By early 1942, Kaiser's yards are building Liberty ships in around 70 days, then 60 days. The improvements keep coming. Other shipyards start adopting Kaiser's methods. The Maritime Commission pushes his techniques across the industry. Prefabrication becomes standard. Welding replaces riveting. Modular construction spreads. Kaiser is literally rewriting the rules of shipbuilding in real time, and everyone else is scrambling to keep up. But then something happens that makes international headlines and turns Henry Kaiser into a household name. It's September 1942. The Maritime Commission announces a competition. Which shipyard can build a Liberty ship the fastest? It's partly propaganda. The government wants to boost morale, show America and the world that US industry is unstoppable, but it's also serious. Finding the absolute limit of how fast a Liberty ship can be built will help optimize production across all yards. Kaiser's Richmond Shipyard No. 2 takes the challenge. They select a ship, the SS Robert E. Peary. They pull their best workers. They plan every step meticulously. They stockpile all the prefabricated sections in advance. Everything is ready. On November 8, 1942, they lay the keel. The clock starts. What happens over the next few days is almost unbelievable. The yard operates 24 hours a day, 3 shifts. Workers swarm over the ship. The massive prefabricated sections are lifted into place by cranes and welded together. Miles of wiring, thousands of pipes, the propeller, the rudder, the deck, the superstructure. Everything is happening simultaneously. The ship is growing by the hour. 72 hours after laying the keel, the hull is complete. 96 hours in, the superstructure is attached. The deck is in place. 110 hours in, systems are being tested. 120 hours in, final inspections. 4 days and 15.5 hours after laying the keel, the SS Robert E. Peary is complete and ready for sea trials. 4 days. Let that sink in. A 10,000-ton cargo ship, 440 feet long, 57 feet wide, built in under 5 days. The previous record was 2 weeks. Traditional yards were still taking 6 to 8 months. Kaiser's team built a complete ocean-going vessel in less time than it takes most people to have a really bad flu. The news spreads globally. Allied nations are shocked and encouraged. Axis nations are terrified. The propaganda value is enormous. America isn't just entering the war with military might. America is entering with industrial capacity on a scale the world has never seen. If they can build a ship in 4 days, what else can they do? Of course, skeptics immediately point out that this is a stunt. You can't sustain that pace. The Robert E. Peary was built with everything pre-staged, the best workers, perfect conditions, doesn't represent real production rates. And they're right. Kaiser's yards don't build every ship in 4 days, but here's what matters. The Robert E. Peary proves what's possible. It shows that with the right organization, the right methods, and the right workforce, shipbuilding can be incredibly fast. After the publicity stunt, Kaiser's yards settle into a sustainable rhythm. And that rhythm is still mind-blowing. By 1943, the average construction time for a Liberty ship in Kaiser's yards is around 45 days. Some ships take longer. Some take less, but on average, a ship goes from keel laying to sea trials in 6 to 7 weeks. Traditional shipyards have improved too, learning from Kaiser's methods, but they're still averaging 70 to 90 days. Let's do the math. Kaiser's 3 main shipyards in Richmond, Portland, and Vancouver are collectively launching roughly 3 ships per week at peak production. 3 ships. every week. That's a complete 10,000-ton cargo vessel rolling out every 2 to 3 days on average across his facilities. It's an industrial achievement that's hard to comprehend even today. By the end of 1943, Kaiser's yards have built over 300 Liberty ships. By the end of the war in 1945, they've built nearly 1,500. The entire Liberty ship program produces 2,700 ships total. Kaiser is responsible for more than half of them. And those 2,700 ships carry the cargo that wins the war: troops to Europe, tanks to North Africa, supplies to the Soviet Union, food to Britain, oil to the Pacific, everything. But the Liberty ship story is about more than just ships. Kaiser's methods revolutionized manufacturing beyond shipbuilding. The techniques he pioneered, prefabrication, modular construction, assembly line thinking, standardized parts, training unskilled workers for specific tasks, these concepts spread to other industries. After the war, American manufacturing dominates the global economy for decades. Part of that dominance comes from lessons learned building Liberty ships. Companies that worked on Kaiser's shipyards took those lessons into aircraft manufacturing, automobile production, construction, and eventually electronics. The entire post-war economic boom is built partially on manufacturing techniques refined under the pressure of wartime shipbuilding. Kaiser himself becomes one of the most famous industrialists in America. He's on magazine covers. He's celebrated as a symbol of American innovation and can-do spirit. After the war, he builds cars, creates Kaiser Permanente healthcare, develops aluminum production, and continues pushing boundaries. But the Liberty ships remain his most famous achievement. The ships themselves have interesting histories. Many Liberty ships serve for decades after the war. Some are converted to civilian use. Some become museum ships. A few are still floating today, 80 years later, which is remarkable given they were designed as cheap, mass-produced vessels never meant to last. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien, docked in San Francisco, is a floating museum you can visit. The SS John W. Brown in Baltimore still makes occasional trips under steam power, but perhaps the most important legacy is proof of concept. Kaiser proved that when a crisis demands it, industrial production can be scaled and accelerated beyond what experts think is possible. He proved that traditional methods aren't sacred, that "we've always done it this way" isn't a valid argument against innovation, that an outsider with fresh eyes can sometimes solve problems that industry veterans can't. The shipbuilding establishment thought Kaiser was a joke in 1941. By 1943, they were copying his methods. By 1945, his techniques were industry standard. That's the power of being willing to challenge assumptions and try new approaches. It's important to note that Kaiser's success wasn't without problems. The rapid construction and use of welding instead of riveting did lead to some structural issues. Several Liberty ships experienced catastrophic hull failures, literally breaking in half at sea. The cold waters of the North Atlantic made the steel brittle, and some welds failed under stress. These failures killed sailors and sank cargo. Engineers eventually identified the problems and developed solutions: better welding techniques, design modifications to distribute stress more evenly, higher quality steel. But those fixes came after some ships had already failed and people had already died. It's a reminder that innovation, especially rushed, wartime innovation, carries risks. Kaiser also benefited from wartime labor conditions that wouldn't be acceptable today. Workers put in brutal hours, safety standards were often minimal, the pressure to produce was intense, people got hurt, some died in industrial accidents, the workforce was pushed hard, and not everyone who worked in Kaiser's yards looks back on the experience fondly. But when you're losing a war and thousands of soldiers are dying every day because supplies aren't reaching them, the calculus changes. The ships Kaiser built saved more lives than were lost building them. That's not a comfortable moral equation, but it's the reality of wartime production. So what did we learn from Henry Kaiser and the Liberty ships? First, expertise can be a trap. The shipbuilding experts knew that ships required skilled labor, traditional methods, and long construction times. They knew it so well that they couldn't imagine alternatives. Kaiser, the outsider, wasn't burdened by that knowledge. He looked at the problem fresh and found solutions the experts had missed. Second, standardization and mass production can be applied to almost anything. Ships seem like they'd be too complex, too custom for assembly line techniques. Kaiser proved that wrong. If you can break a process into steps and standardize components, you can mass produce it. Third, training matters more than credentials. Kaiser took people with no shipbuilding experience and turned them into a workforce that built 1,500 ships. He did it with good training, clear processes, and smart job design. It's a lesson that applies far beyond shipbuilding. Fourth, infrastructure and support systems matter. Kaiser understood that building ships fast meant solving all the peripheral problems: housing, childcare, healthcare, supply chains. You can't optimize one part of a system while ignoring everything else. And finally, impossible is usually just difficult. Experts said you couldn't build a ship in less than 8 months. Kaiser built them in 6 weeks. The 4-day ship was a stunt, sure, but it proved that the supposed limits were artificial. When you hear that's impossible, sometimes the right response is, let me try anyway. The Liberty ships won the war, not the sexy parts, not D-Day or Midway or the Battle of the Bulge. Those battles mattered, but you can't fight battles without supplies, without fuel, without food, without reinforcements. The Liberty ships carried everything. They were the logistics backbone of Allied victory, and they existed in the numbers needed because one civilian who'd never built a ship decided that the traditional way of doing things wasn't good enough. Henry Kaiser looked at a 230-day process and said, I can do this in 45 days. The experts laughed. Then they watched him do it. Then they copied him. That's innovation. That's what happens when you question assumptions and refuse to accept impossible as an answer. The next time someone tells you something can't be done, remember the Liberty ships. Remember the man who'd never built a ship revolutionizing shipbuilding. Remember that 4 days beat 230 days because someone was willing to try something new. Hit subscribe to see how this mass production revolution changed modern warfare.